Oh,
They're so beautiful. You don't look
that
at
actually sounds really
because you smell my cat, I'm sure. All 6 of them.
6 cats.
Yeah. I have 6 cats. I have like a 25.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We at Left Bank Books are delighted to welcome author James Renner, who's also an investigative journalist, podcaster, and a critically acclaimed author of both fiction and nonfiction. And he'll be discussing his new book, Scout Camp: Sex, Death, and Secret Societies Inside Boy Scouts of America. So a couple notes before we begin. Tonight's event is only possible because of your support. When you shop at Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into our local economy, so it helps keep the streets paved and plowed and the parks beautiful and everything else that makes St. Louis wonderful. So thank you for shopping local and allowing us to give support to authors like James by working events such as these. So we're really happy to see you here tonight. And thank you to everyone joining us virtually as well. We appreciate seeing your pixels here. You'll be able to participate in the event as well. We'll do a Q&A at the end. If you have any questions that you want to leave as a YouTube comment, we'll be able to, I'll read them aloud that way so you can join in as well. So thank you for being here. James Renner is an investigative journalist, podcaster, and critically acclaimed author. His books include both fiction and nonfiction. He is also the podcast host of The Philosophy of Crime and True Crime This Week. He's the founder and director of the Porchlight Project, which is a nonprofit that provides genetic genealogy for cold cases in Ohio, which is amazing. And he currently lives in Akron with his wife and children. And this is his newest book called Scout Camp. It is a timely and deeply personal true crime memoir where he explores the dark side of an American institution and its pervasive culture of sexual abuse, as well as the traumatic and even deadly repercussions of its long-buried secrets. Library Journal calls Scout Camp a compelling, deeply personal, captivating story. Renner takes a grim yet cathartic and at times humorous journey through memory and trauma in this riveting true crime memoir. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to James Renner.
All right, thanks for coming
You guys can hear me.
We can.
Do I need this for that though?
I think it should be okay. If you know.
I'll use it.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
First of all, I want to thank Left Bank Books. Sometimes I do this for 2 people. Sometimes there's 40. Sometimes there's 100. You never know. They did a ton of. I've been following you guys on social. I know you guys did a ton of marketing and advertising for this, but there's 100 factors that go into who might show up and when. It's the weather. It's sports. It's the state of the world. So thank you. But this is the first reading I've had for this book. I had a reading scheduled at my hometown bookstore, And it was scheduled 6 months in advance, and 3 weeks before the event, everybody decided it was going to be blackout day. So it was too late to reschedule. But we actually had a decent turnout for it. We went from a reading and we were just like, I'll just sit at the table and sign some copies. But we had a decent number of people come out for that. So anyways, this is the first official reading from this. So might be a little rusty on this one. I haven't perfected this yet, but Scout Camp was a long time coming. It tells the story of the bigger story of the abuse scandals within the Boy Scouts of America, and how it went from a Norman Rockwell bedrock of America institution into bankruptcy, and now there isn't even they don't even call it Boy Scouts of America, it's Scouting America, and how all that happened. But it also tells the story of when I was a counselor, a camp counselor at the largest Boy Scout camp in Ohio back in '95 when I was 17 years old. And it opens up kind of reminiscing on that, and then slowly.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. So that summer, I worked at this camp called Seven Ranges, and during that summer, one of the counselors died under mysterious circumstances. And at the time, we were told it was a suicide. And then they brought us all back in after about an hour or two, and they said, well, we got it wrong, it was an accident. And when I became a reporter several years later, I did pull the police reports at that time and discovered that they were not able to rule out murder. So there was this mystery that was kind of always hanging around in the back of my mind. And I finally got to the point where I was ready to tell that story. And I had to track down these old friends of mine from 1995 and try to get to the bottom of what really happened that summer, what happened to us, how it happened, and who might be responsible. And it was a doozy of an adventure.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why did you think there was foul play?
So I can, I'll jump ahead a little bit and tell you a little bit.
Okay.
So, there was a counselor there named Mike Klingler, and he, that summer I was what's called a counselor in training. So they had a little series of tents in a hidden back behind some pine trees, and that's where us counselors in training were supposed to stay and sleep. And we'd sleep in these old green army issue tents on top of paddocks. And Mike Klingler was the adult, and he was like 26, 27. He's also a teacher when outside of summer camp. He taught elementary school. And so he was in charge of the CITs that year. And my first night there, I just got kind of a weird feeling. He came into my tent and told me I had, what he said was he thought I had elf's ears. He said, your ears remind me of an elf. And just a weird conversation, just kind of something was a bit off. And I weaseled my way out of CITville, and I ended up staying at the first aid station. They had a couple beds there. There was a hot shower there, and it was much better accommodations. And I was able to do that because I was teaching the first aid merit bench. So ended up getting in there, getting out of CITville, which probably, I don't know, definitely saved me in some ways. But there was another young man on staff who I call Tommy in this book. I say right up front that I've changed the names of the survivors of that summer, and the names of the dead in here are real. But Tommy became the fixation of Mike Klingler. And I can kind of see it happening. One morning, Tommy came into the dining hall, and his skin was just ashen gray. I've never seen anybody like that. He wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't eat. And eventually one of the better, senior counselors pulled him aside, and that's the last I saw of Tommy. And it turned out the night before, Klingler had assaulted Tommy on an overnight camp. And so when he was confronted, he was escorted out of camp, Klingler, and then went home. And what we were told the next morning is that he went home and shot himself. And then, like I said, we were pulled back in and said it wasn't suicide. He was shooting at some cans in his backyard and it ricocheted.
Is that the official?
The official, when I pulled the police report and coroner's report, was that he died of a gunshot wound, and they were not able to determine if he fired the shot or if somebody else fired the shot. So there was also another mystery around camp that summer, which was who's this arsonist? There was an arsonist in camp, burning things down. The trading post burned down the summer before that. And so that's the mystery I was trying to solve as a 17-year-old. There's some dangerous person at camp. I got to find out who this is. And so I was trying to figure that out. So that's kind of wrapped up in this story as well. And that does have an ending to it. There is another piece of this, which is that at Seven Ranges, there is to this day a secret society that operates out of the summer camp, and it's called Pipestone. And on Friday nights, these kids are taken through this ceremony, and it blows my mind that this has ever been able to exist and still exists to some extent to this day. So let me read you a little bit about Pipestone, because that has a central role to play in what happened to everybody that summer, including the Klingler. So I'll read you just a little bit here. There's the Amber Alert. 33 years after that summer, it's hard for me to recall much more of that first week other than flashes of images and a feeling of freedom. I recall a giant water balloon war between our troop and the troop next door to Wyandotte. They had catapults that could launch a balloon over the treetops all the way to our tents. This scene happens when I'm 11 years old, years before I was a counselor at camp. This is my first introduction to Pipestone. However, I remember Pipestone in exquisite detail. Friday night, the last night of camp, I joined up with a group of tenderfoots who had gathered outside the admin building. There were maybe 50 of us, most under the age of 13. We were told to fold our arms over our chests and walk quietly across the road to the path that led to the woods beyond. Until then, that was a part of camp we'd been forbidden to enter. The sun was setting and the woods were dark, so we walked carefully along the dirt trail over exposed roots and washouts, an adult chaperone up front pointing the way with a flashlight. Eventually, we came to a field of bluegrass. They told us to sit quietly there, and then one of the adults built a fire with long, clean sticks they called faggots. Once the fire was lit, every adult disappeared, and we were simply children abandoned in the woods. What were we supposed to do? How long were we supposed to wait? Nobody had left instructions other than to remain still, to remain quiet. Eventually, the sun vanished, and the stars came out, and the peepers sang, and the fireflies danced, and the fire consumed itself until nothing remained besides those glowing embers. And then the Indians came for us. I thought, I'll get there. It'll probably answer the question. I thought the Indians were real. Remember, I was 11. My capacity to reason was not fully primed, and I remember thinking the elders at camp must have done some deal with a local reservation, like maybe they'd bust the Indians in every Friday night so they could perform their old rituals to terrorize the kids. Perhaps they even let them take a couple boys to keep the peace. Anyway, they came screaming out of the woods, the orange light of the dying fire reflecting off their dark skin. Red men in loincloths and leather moccasins. They hollered like a war party, the scalping kind. And yes, I know they are called Native Americans, and the tribes in this region of Ohio probably didn't ever scalp anybody. This was 1989, and the men playing the part were anything but woke. At Seven Rangers, they were always Indians. The Indians grabbed the little children and pulled them to their feet, twisting their arms into pretzels so that each boy was standing with his arms folded over his chest. I jumped up and stood still and folded my arms before they got to me. An Indian passed by. I could smell his body rank with sweat in the humid air. Suddenly there was a loud hissing, and I looked to see another Indian holding a lit road flare. Its smoke was strong with sulfur, like those things you get at the fireworks store, the small hockey pucks that transform into snakes when you light them. The Indian with the flare jogged into the woods, creating a cavern of light under a verdant primordial canopy down a trail that led farther away from camp. We were instructed by shoves, by barks, by pointed fingers, but never by words, to follow. I joined the others running down the path, which was narrow and turned sharply around large rocks and over knobbly roots of century-old trees. They prodded us to move faster, dangerously fast. And now all the Indians had flares, and it was impossible to hear anything besides the sizzle of the bright red lights, and everything was cast in that cancerous glow, and we were the deep shadows racing through the forest. Around another bend, the boy in front of me slipped and face-planted into the dirt. I dodged to the side. There was no time to stop, but the boy behind me tripped over him and went down too. Suddenly I was seized. A large Indian grabbed my shoulders from behind and pushed me forward, faster, around the others. Perhaps he misinterpreted what had just happened. Maybe he thought I had caused the other boys to fall because this seemed like some kind of punishment. He pushed me all the way to the front of the line, and then we arrived at a clearing in the forest. A fire raged at the bottom of a slope, and what I saw there struck me with bright fear. A great Indian chief sat on a stump behind a raised fire inside a wire grating the size and shape of a pig's trough. As the sticks burned, their embers fell through the holes and down to the ground like little meteors. The chief wore a headdress of peacock feathers, and his fat red gut drooped over his loincloth. He appeared disinterested in his visitors. He might have been sleeping. Indian dignitaries stood to either side of him, guarding him. The flares were snuffed out on the ground, and I was led down the hill, close enough to the fire that I could feel its heat. The other boys lined up in rows behind me. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen to me first. One of those other Indians, the ones that made up the chief's council, stepped forward, eyes on me. He wore bells around his ankles that announced his every move. He lifted his right hand, palm facing me. I didn't move. All I knew for sure was that anyone who moved got collected by one of their guards. A moment went by, and then another Indian grabbed me and undid my arms and twisted my hand open so that I was copying the chief's lieutenant. I got it. Monkey see, monkey do. The second Indian lifted a hand. I repeated the action. He motioned for me to step forward. I did so on wobbly legs. I was unaware of the 100 eyes marking my every move. I was in a ritual, and the only thing that existed was the ritual now, until it was completed, like communion, or the ancient ritual of Chud. I felt that if I did something wrong, these Indians could make a kid disappear pretty quick. I wondered, did my dad know anything about this? Did any of our parents know what they were doing to us? An Indian handed me a clamshell full of liquid. Drink, he whispered. Spit it out and you fail. I brought the shell to my lips and sipped, swallowed. Whatever was in it instantly dried up my mouth and puckered my lips. Bitter, more bitter than anything I'd ever tasted before. My mind thought of Clorox bleach, but they wouldn't really make a kid drink bleach, right? I gritted my teeth and swallowed. Many years later, I would learn that what they made us drink at night was denatonium, commonly known as Bitrix. It's the stuff they put in antifreeze and shampoo so toddlers don't drink it. I was taken then to a medicine man who held a stone tablet on which was written simple commandments. I had to recite them out loud. Before these braves, I promised to tell no other person of this ceremony, I said. An Indian keeps his word, whether good or evil. I go now to the great chief to learn the password of this first degree. I walked to the chief, who was bigger and older than the other Indians. He was morbidly obese, and for the first time I felt some relief. This was no Indian. I could see that now. This was just a fat white man who painted his body. He looked like my bus driver. I was forced to the ground in front of him. I knelt before the chief, so close that his bare legs flanked me on either side. He turned and brought out a human skull and placed it in front of my face. Look inside and see the password to the second degree, he said in a low voice. Do not share this password with anybody, or your pipestone will be taken from you. I leaned forward, and as I did, a light came on inside the skull where a man's brains were once stored. On the back of the skull was a single word, secrecy. Do you understand? Yes, I replied. Return to your people, the chief said. He waved me on to a final Indian who placed something in my hand. It was small and square and hard like a rock. I didn't look though. If I tried to look, one of the other Indians would surely correct me. So I walked quietly to the back of the line with my arms folded. I watched as the other boys passed through the trials. Occasionally, a scout would spit the bitter juice onto the ground, and then several Indians would jump him and pull him back to the back of the line, and he'd have to start over. I was aware, too, that our group was smaller than it was when we started. Some of the boys had not made it all the way to the clearing at the end of the path. I felt pride in that. At some point, I realized that my arms were folded so tightly that I was squeezing my chest. It was becoming hard to breathe. Very quietly, aware of every Indian around the fire, I relaxed my grip and breathed in deeply. Oxygen rushed to my brain, and I promptly fainted. When I awoke, I found myself on the ground near the edge of the woods, looking up at another Indian. This one didn't look scary. This one looked genuinely concerned. Could not have been more than 16 years old. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. My head was swimming, though. Can you breathe? Yes. Good, he said. He helped me to sit up. We were back a ways from the ceremony at the top of the slope, and we were not alone. A couple other scouts sat quietly nearby, looking on. I could tell that one had been crying. We were the weak one. When the last scout had completed the gauntlet, the chief invited us to come and sit with him at the fire as true braves. We gathered around, and he gave a speech about the importance of keeping secrets. Real men kept secrets, and we were becoming real men. This was the first step on that journey. But most of all, we must never, ever talk about what happened on this side of the road, of the things that happened at Pipestone. Then he told us a story about some kind of Indian god called the Walk and Talk Man, and a goddess known as the Buffalo Calf Woman, who returned to earth as a white buffalo in times of transformation. After he was done, the chief commanded us to return to camp, and his Indians chased us all the way back to the road and left us there to walk back to our campsites alone at around 3 a.m. I didn't open my hand until I was safely back inside my tent. I had been so afraid to drop what they'd given me, to lose it on the trail. I gripped it so tightly that it left a square mark on my palm. I shone my flashlight on the token. It was a square of rock, the color of good mud, and upon it was carved a stick-figure man holding a staff above his head, the sigil of the first degree of Pipestone. I had survived. I was part of some secret and mysterious society now. My first thought was I couldn't wait to tell my father. Then I remembered the chief's warning. If I wanted to become a good man, I must understand the need for secrecy. I could never tell my father. Why should I? Real men keep secrets. So that's the first year of Pipestone. The fourth year of Pipestone, when I took it in 95, and I remember this verbatim from the chief's speech, was masturbation leads to curiosity. Leave your friendships with the same sex behind. So it was weirdly homophobic and creepy and just wrong in every way.
It was like a Catholic school lecture.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Catholic school. And what's interesting is Catholic schools. What's interesting is the abuse scandal inside the Catholic Church. At the height of it in the United States, 11,000 victims filed suit against the Catholic Church. With the Boy Scouts, it hasn't been properly reported as far as the scale of it, because 82,000 victims have sued the Boy Scouts.
How many of the 11,000 got sued were their genders?
Catholic schools?
Well, in the beginning, you said there was 11,000 that sued.
Yeah, 11,000 sued the Catholic Church. I think those were boys and girls. I would think the majority were, the small majority were boys. With the Boy Scouts, of course, that's 82,000 boys. And this story can all be traced back to like one guy on that list. And there are 81,999, just like him. This is the toll that one of them did. So,
Well, that's insane.
yeah, the numbers are crazy. And the Boy Scouts declared bankruptcy and put aside money to pay the victims of Boy Scouts abuse, but they have still yet to be paid because it's still winding through the courts. But the Boy Scouts are very pragmatic, as part of their mission and what they do. And so you can go on the Boy Scout website to this day as a victim and go, they have a nice calculator for you. So you type in your state and your date of birth and the type of abuse, and they will send you a number of what you should expect to receive from the Boy Scouts. So it's weird because somebody had to figure out how much
Right, like what's worth what?
exactly, how much penetration versus blowjob versus touching. So some sort of actuary had to.
I'd love to see that
figure
chart,
Yeah. Well, go on the Boy Scout website.
Yeah, I mean, is that there? Is that really a thing?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that.
Well, I came here for something else, so now I'm like trying to learn something else, which
Yeah.
is like, wow. That's
This
insane.
book is also about my personal journey with substance abuse and sexuality, and when it came out last week, it for a few days it was the #1 best-selling LGBTQ plus book
Well, that's
in the
amazing.
country, which
Well,
I didn't expect to ever write something like that, but it just kind of happened. So yeah, that is an introduction to Pipestone in the book itself. Much of it is darker than the passages that I read, but I wanted to make it bookstore friendly. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very, very much for coming out. We can have a private conversation now if you want, and I'm happy to sign a couple books for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I'm gonna check if there's any questions in the audience. Did anyone have any questions for?
Oh, yeah.
Before
Any
before we
questions?
move to the thing?
I can talk to him right here, so.
Oh yeah, we can wait.
How has your understanding of survivalhood changed as you've gotten older and with more distance from your circumstances?
That's a good question. So one thing that they aren't, so that the Boy Scouts has that calculator, right, for how much you get paid if you're a victim of abuse. But what nobody's considered is how we're going to heal 82,000 people.
Right.
And so, that kind of helped me understand like the mission of trying to heal people that deal with abuse and psychological disorders and everything that comes from that. And I was going on my own personal journey as I was researching this book, and I met up with a group called MAPS in DC, and they are a lobbying group and also a scientific group that their mission is to legalize psychedelic therapy for right now it's for veterans that suffer from PTSD. And they found that using MDMA and psilocybin in a therapeutic session, there's like a 66% success rate. Like not like treated, but like they claim cure PTSD. And their hope is to make it legal for therapy for anybody in general that is suffering from this. But in order to get it legalized through the federal government, they're trying to prove that it can help soldiers, because the way it's going to get passed is these congressmen are going to see it as an opportunity to, instead of losing soldiers to psychological trauma, they can cure them and send them back. So I met up with them and I learned a lot about that therapy. And I think it can be applied to the Boy Scouts.
Have you ever done that therapy?
I'm glad you asked. There's a chapter in the book where I get together with one of their people in DC, and I do trip balls on psilocybin,
Excellent.
and it was extremely helpful. I felt
So you know what you're talking about.
yeah, exactly. And I go into great detail to describe it. There are immediate benefits. What it does, what it did for me anyways, is, the cycles of thought, those cascading thoughts that we get that we can't seem to shut down, just the patterns and habits of thought. It just kind of reboots the brain. And when you power back up, those compulsive thoughts aren't really there. It also helps with alcoholism. One of the founders of AA, which was founded in Akron, where I'm writing this book, had planned to make psychedelic therapy the 13th step. And because of political pressure, it decided against that. But he tried it. And it's specifically helpful with that compulsion to drink and drink and drink to excess. So you see immediate benefits, and then there are, long-term benefits. So about 6 months after I tried that is where I got kind of the full effect. And it was very gradual. And after about 6 months, I was in a real good place. And it's not something, people are afraid that you're going to go out and use psychedelics.
Well, what happens after the 6 months? You continue, or
You don't need to continue.
you just are cured?
That about 66% of the people that they're seeing are. Psychedelics are not something you're going to want to do on a weekend basis, or every night. You just wouldn't do that. That's the first and only time I've done it. I have no real desire to go out and do it again anytime soon. I mean, it was an experience. Most of it was helpful, but it was a scary experience too. But it has amazing benefits. So
I've done EMDR.
Ooh.
And EMDR, for me, it was basically, it helped me become more bodily aware of what my body's doing when I have a panic attack.
Oh, nice.
I'm a survivor myself. And so, when I first did it, we went to the first time it happened.
Mm.
And then for the maximal effect, we went to the last time it happened. And able to be present here, but also help past Stephen then.
Yes.
And really kind of recognize what my body was doing then and what my body is doing now, but when I'm kind of in that triggered state, as it relates to the traumatic memory and the traumatic triggering of, recall that memory.
One of the things I like about having done this book is it opens up people and gives them permission and an opportunity to their own journeys. And yeah, first of all, I'm sorry for what happened to you, but thank you for sharing that. And there's so many people that are, going through similar things. It's weird what the brain can do. And, link it there. And how stuff that happened to us 40 years ago is still an issue in ways that we don't even understand.
Right.
And it takes a therapist to kind of point out, okay, what you're doing here is linked back here, and here's the path you need to go to kind of rewire your brain in a way. And I found that very interesting. The book is also a lot about consciousness and how consciousness works like that. But I was going to say about that. Yeah, it's the stuff that happens early on. I mean, you can see the effects of all my friends from back then and what that summer did, and how it comes. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The therapist that I used, you're talking about things that happen as kids. That kid is still inside of us and is still looking for protection that it didn't have. So one thing that the therapist recommended that I did do was I found a picture of myself, and here's the picture.
That was going to be one of my questions.
That's me at 11. And I set it on my nightstand. And so in the morning when I wake up, I look at him and I say, "You're safe," and then I go about my day. And, at night I look at it sometimes and I'm like, see, I'm still safe.
I've been doing a lot of work on teenage Stephen, and that's been like trying to create that safe space for him because the more that I do this journey, the more that I realize there was trauma before the trauma,
Yeah.
and really kind of in my therapist, one of her things that she always says is that you're as old as your last healed trauma.
Yes. Yeah.
And so getting to the point where you're fully present here at your current age has been definitely a really fascinating, not even for the faint of heart journey. So.
Yeah.
Well, that's weird. Like, you're as old as your last healed trauma.
Yes.
It's that arrested.
So I'm like 11, right?
If that's
Yeah, like I never thought of it like that. Except I'm not, but I get what you're saying,
Well, I mean,
Like,
as far as where you are with your thought process, where you are with your understanding of the world, where you are with one of the things that I've been really working on is redefining things, because I had a core definition of love and trust and happiness as a kid, and blown to hell, and then redefining that in the wake of things is difficult, but then if you don't face it then, you have to face it eventually. I don't think that anything's truly buried.
And that's super healthy. And how old are you? Like 30?
I'll be 33 next month.
Yeah, like you get it.
Well, you're ahead of the game though.
Yeah,
think most
I mean,
people
that's
don't
like-
make that journey until they're a little bit older. So
Yeah, like 47. You're like, oh,
Oh
I
my
get it.
gosh,
And,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I remember I was 20 years old when I first read The Silence of Men, which is by Richard Jeffrey Newman. And it was the first book that I read about an abuse of a male.
Mm.
And that book completely broke me open in so many different ways. And now it's really cool. I met Richard at a conference a year ago. And I was just like, your book, man, totally just changed my world. And it was really great. And we had coffee and talked and
that's
talked.
really cool.
So-
That's so great.
Yeah.
I remember when I was starting out as a reporter about 20 years ago, like in my mid to late 20s, I'd written an article about Pipestone or whatever, and I remember sitting down with my editor at the paper, who's from Minneapolis, and this old cranky guy, and I told him, I'm having this anxiety talking about this stuff. I said, should I go see